All right, thank you very much, Stephen Mbide, for the update there. I don't see any roads and any cars rather on the roads, and perhaps, like Stephen says, people are already in the festive season and have probably traveled. But we also know that those who could have chosen not to go onto Uganda's or Kampala's roads in light of the rehabilitation, renovations, and the construction that is currently going on. Allow me get back to the studio and take note of the fact that China's resource envelope to Africa has, over the last 20 years, appeared to be burgeoning. But there are questions that are being asked in light of the conditionalities and the regimes on development aid and assistance. I'll be introducing my guests shortly, who will be helping us understand what that push is and what Uganda and Africa stand to gain. The recent delisting of Uganda by the United States from the AGOA initiative has riled Kampala and indeed Africa in general, especially after Washington tagged the decision to the controversial Anti-Homosexuality Act that seeks to reverse what appears to be a Western plot to infuse the vice within Africa at all cost. This has forced Kampala to start to look to the east with a more deliberate strategy in a bid to win the country off depending heavily on American and European aid and development assistance. As Uganda gears up for the Non-Aligned Movement Summit, the G77 plus China third South Summit, which follows thereafter, may be Africa's most potent move yet in realigning what's disproportionately unfavorable economic growth relationship with the big powers. Now, the question is, does China offer and represent in its multifaceted push for development aid of no conditionalities something that Africa needs and wants, or is it a superpower that is also inching forward in ensuring that it achieves its strategic geopolitical goals? I'm joined by the Executive Director at Sino-Uganda Research Center, Dr. Alawi Semanda. Many thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Chris.
I'm also joined by Moshi Israel, a researcher and scholar of international relations at Sino Research Center. Many thanks for joining us, gentlemen.
Thank you.
The G77 plus China summit is as grand as they come. And the fact that we shall be hosting it immediately after the Non-Aligned Movement, a summit and organization that is rooted in the geopolitical tensions that gripped the world more than 40 years ago, these two are significant. But China's hold onto Africa's development aid landscape over the last 20 to 15 years has been grand in terms of infrastructure projects, in terms of interventions with regard to investment and all these packages. Allow me go to Dr. Alawi first. What does Uganda stand to gain this time round, especially the fact that China has been crafted in on top of the 77 countries of the global south?
Well, I think we have very many things we can gain from this conference. First of all is showcasing our country and culture. That is top.
Yeah.
Then in terms of diplomacy, or showing that Uganda is a peaceful country, it is friendly, it can host. Remember, there was a contest before Uganda was chosen to host this conference, and Uganda was selected. So this also tells you the role our top diplomats in New York and globally
have done in negotiating.
Yes, so that tells you that that we, at least we are on the move globally, we can be seen and we can be trusted to host over 77 countries. That is also a very big plus. But let's also remember that we've seen roads being worked on in the Kampala. Our potholes at least are being cleared. So at the end, people will know that when we hosted the G77 plus China,
things improved.
At least things improved. But I think we are likely to be caught by time. That is my fear. But also it tells you, if over 77 countries can trust a country to say, let's go there, it also tells you in terms of leadership, in terms of security. People wouldn't want to go in a place where they think the place is not secure, or where they think they will not be they will not go back. And this might explain when you see leaders going into conflict areas, they don't announce, they go abruptly. But here we've been announcing for over a year, and people know that we'll be in Uganda. And I'm very sure our security must be doing their best to make sure that this can end very, very successfully. Away from that, it also gives even young people opportunity. I'm very sure there are many young scholars, especially in high school, who are going to ask themselves, why are we hosting this conference? And at the end, you'll see people getting into international relations fair to study, because it's really of great interest. But other than that, when it comes to trade, when it comes to the service sector, hotels, I'm very sure Ugandans are going to earn a living from that. And of course, away from that, I know you talked about how China is getting in. We know that China, for example, has donated over 70 cars that are going, not a grant, it has donated. That these cars,
they're not taking them back by any conditions.
Yes, by some, I remember there are some politicians who lost elections and went back with the ambulances. But China says that they've given to Uganda, which represents Africa in this case, and so these vehicles will stay. Of course, this also means that the money which government was going to spend, probably now that money will be channeled to education, maybe to health, or to our infrastructure, which I think is also another big plus. Okay. Yes.
All right. Mr. Israel Moshi, when we see China making inroads across Africa, it is standard practice perhaps for any country that has achieved the kind of economic muscle that China has achieved to be seen to make incursions, be engaging to investment and roll out its ideologies and way of doing things that is developmental for both parties. But it comes at a time when the West feels that it's being attacked and its space is being taken up. So we as a country find ourselves in a spot of bother. The West has its concerns, we also have our concerns, and China has offers. What is your take on what China brings on board vis-a-vis what the West has often put to us?
Okay, thank you for that question. As you have said, we have a tri-set of issues here. We have the developing countries in the middle, especially Africa in this case. Then we have on the left the United States and Western allies, and on the right we have China. And we have the task of choosing who is best for us as a country, as developing nations. And to tie it into the G77 plus China summit that is going to take place here, we see that the main focus of one of the biggest intergovernmental organizations in the world, the G77 plus, is that it focuses on changing the rules of the game. What are these rules of the game? That is the rules that have been established by the international rules-based order led by the West. And China, being a very developing country that has a huge economy, second only to the United States, has become the de facto face of this resistance against the international rules-based order. And we developing countries, we have to look towards a partner, international partner that works for us. And so far through Chinese loans and grants and assistance aid, we have discovered a kind of partner that respects our values, doesn't interfere in our politics, and the results of their investments can be seen through these different infrastructure projects. When you stand here as a local Ugandan, a normal Ugandan, common Ugandan, you can sit back and say, I see the expressway, I see Karuma Dam, I see Isimba Dam. You identify these projects vis-a-vis when you go to the other side of loans and investments and grants. It's hard, really, it's hard to convince a common Ugandan to say, what has the Bretton Woods institutions done for us? It's hard to convince. You have to go into microeconomics, macroeconomics jargons to try to explain the benefits. And therefore, I think China, being the face of this resistance. It doesn't want to be the face, but it has been the face of this resistance because of its economic achievements. Therefore, it aligns very well with developing nations and our ambitions within the G77 plus.
Okay. Dr. Alawi, Moshi talks about something that literally pits the West against China, and we perhaps stand in a position where we could be a proxy, so to speak. But the South, or the global South, have been proxies before, especially during the Cold War. They know what this game is, they know the consequences, and perhaps are willing and ready to take on whatever challenges that will be coming on board. When it comes to the fact that China does not, as Moshi puts it, want the conditionalities on aid, we also have issues that are legitimate, that some of our governments have a tendency to do rights violations if no one is looking. Now that China is not looking or doesn't want to look, won't that give some of our governments in the South the leeway to do as they wish and continue the non-observance of human rights?
Well, first of all, I need to make a bit this clear. China has never made Africa or the global South a center of contention. It is the global, it is the West collectively that have always described Africa as a battleground for them. On the other side, I have at least heard China's top diplomat Wang Yi saying that Africa should be a place of collaboration, should be a place where they can work, where we can work with them to develop the region. But the other side thinks that it is a battleground, it is a place where people should be coming to say, align with me or don't align with me. And I really don't believe that we have to choose between China and the West collectively. In my view, I think we should look at them. If the West can do something better for us, we should move with them. If we think they can't do for us, as he has put it, you remember the Build Back Better during in the London, which then recently we had G7 in Japan. They've made several promises on investing in infrastructure, and they've delivered zero. You can't see anything. If I ask you to tell me what the G77 did in 2020, 2021, 2022, despite
the European Union has the Northern Bypass.
Yes,
so
but I'm talking about G7 and the EU. I know that many of the countries are member, but these are individual members. I am not referring as a grouping. But away from that, we also know when you talk about human rights, and it's very interesting. Remember, your concern as an African country, as a global South country, your concern is your concern. But the concern of the West collectively, they want to make it our concern, global concern. Their value, they will tell us their values. I really don't know which value they stand for. Me and you were watching, at least from the televisions, what happened in the UN Security Council, where the world voted to stop the massacre in Gaza. And the big brother said, well, I can veto that against the world. The international, is it Amnesty International, Agnes, I saw she described it as inexcusable and said what the US did was inexcusable and lack of global leadership. And this is Amnesty International not speaking. So if you can see thousands of people dying, actually in this case tens of thousands, and you decide to keep quiet, then you come into other countries to tell them how to govern their countries, I think it is inexcusable. And I'm not saying that I don't understand what human rights is. I really love having human rights being respected. I know what democracy means. I really love democracy, but I don't want skewed democracy where you choose, cherry pick what benefits you. If it does not benefit you, you leave it. And I can give you an example. There was a documentary which you can look for. I doubt you'll find it. Our Man in Cairo.
You will help me find it.
If you go for it, it really was explaining how the West will look for you if you are a good dictator, in quotes, and you can fulfill their desires, then they will promote you. they will keep quiet. They will not criticize you. But if you are a small country in other parts of the world, then they will tell you, they will even lecture you what to do, which I think it is very unacceptable. And when it comes to human rights, I really think should be responsibility first of the nation, citizens. If our political actors cannot rally the citizens to demand for their rights, it means that the actors are failing. It is not acceptable. I want you to imagine where President Putin sanctions a Republican for having done something wrong, and Democrats celebrate. You can't hear that. It is only
unheard of.
Yes, it is only in Africa where Chris Higenyi will be sanctioned by the US,
God
and
forbid.
Mosh will celebrate. You know, God forbid that he would be. So that is not acceptable. And then when we talk about the international rules, we also know that we have the international human rights bodies that are there in Geneva. This is where we would be channeling these concerns. And again, maybe I could ask you, who voted you to be the global police? Is that not interfering in affairs of other countries? But also we know that these countries, they violate human rights. I will tell you, sometimes when you are in certain countries, you have nightmares. You think, I can be shot dead anytime, including being shot by a person who is supposed to be protecting me. Who asks them to account for those acts? Nobody. You were a journalist. You remember Abu, this Al Jazeera journalist. She was murdered in cold blood, and the international community, if I might use that word, has been demanding, can we have those responsible held to account? You know, the International Criminal Court, when they tried to investigate some crimes committed by the US soldiers, they said we will revoke visas, you are not supposed to come. So they lack moral authority to speak. And by the way, there is a study done by several universities, 2022, 2023. They tell us about 78% of Americans, they don't believe that their democracy has a way forward. So I think we can learn from them, but there is little which we can. But I'm happy to learn the little which I think can work for our country. I'm willing to pick it. But I don't think when it comes to moral, when it comes to human rights, that they should be lecturing us. I think that I should listen to Higenyi, I should listen to Moshe, I should listen to we Ugandans. We have actors who can do this. So it's our duty to demand, but not to go outside to call colonizers that come and colonize me, come and teach me how to govern my country.
Okay, let's now transition into trade and investment. And China's story, Moshi Israel, is one that resonates very readily with most of the countries in the South. Just about 40 years ago, China was also a huge recipient of development aid from Russia, from Japan, and their story of economic transformation is pretty much the trajectory that many countries in the South are also trying to follow. So in a way, China looks more like a guy who knows our problems, a guy who understands our struggles and can effectively understand if we are, the moment we fail to step the right direction, we can be helped instead of being criticized. How best can that relationship be emboldened so that we get the most out of it and not, again, years from now, appear to be the colonized?
Of course, that one would take strategic planning and a vision from our own governments here in developing countries, because we are at a disadvantaged position as a developing country. Therefore, we need these partners. That's right. China offers a way forward. We share a story with China. It was developing, we are developing, and it came out of this. They label it a miracle. They had declared
economic miracle,
after the end of the Cold War, they had declared the end of history. But China came up and proved this to be wrong and started a whole new trajectory that even developing countries can develop with their own systems. Not outside the Western framework per se, but combining both systems from the West and from their own national realities and making themselves come out of this pit hole of underdevelopment. And therefore, this is where the greatest inspiration for developing countries comes from with China. And as for the part of them becoming future colonizers,
there is that fear.
There is that fear, but the president, I think, put it properly. I probably wouldn't put it in his stern words when he said in some interview that if they turned against Ugandans, then he would kick them out. That's what he said.
Africans would kick
them out.
Yes, yes, that's what he said, and yes, that's true, because we've had this before. That's why we are in the non-aligned movement, because Fidel Castro in 1979 during the Havana Declaration made this clear and said the purpose of the INAM is to make sure that we ensure our national security, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and in our struggle against imperialism, colonialism, neocolonialism, racism, and all forms of bloc politics and taking political sides. That's the reality of the non-aligned movement, of which Uganda is a part, and therefore we know what to do when approaching China. Okay. And we know China has its own interests and our interests at heart as we negotiate a way forward.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to have to take a short break. When we return, we shall wrap this conversation up with a look at exactly what happens, especially after Uganda takes on the chairmanship of the G77 plus China bloc. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're glad you're still watching Morning at NTV. We are unpacking China's resource envelope to Africa ahead of the G77 China summit that is due to be held in February next year. That will come on the backdrop of the non-aligned movement summit. Of course, Uganda will be taking on the chair for the two blocs, which is very important, especially when it comes to the diplomatic end game. In the studios, I have with me Dr. Alawi Semanda, the Executive Director at the Sino-Uganda Research Center, as well as Moshi Israel, a researcher and international relations scholar also at the Sino Research Center, Uganda. Allow me return to the studio now, to my guests to be specific, and continue this discussion. When it comes to colonialism and neocolonialism, sometimes there is very little to define for the countries who find themselves now grappling to get themselves off that particular tag. And there are fears, by the way, that China, 40 years from now, if the global south does not strategically engage, could be a colonizer. And we've seen this happen, especially with regard to the debt structure. Zambia, for example, has grappled to the extent that at one point an entire police station, body, the force, was seen to be tilting towards Chinese way of policing. Let me begin with Moshe Israel. When it comes to what could be ideological issues, China has a people-centered philosophy when it comes to development. I do not know how or whether that also plays into the diplomatic endgame. Do they put people first, and that means Ugandans first in their engagement, or Africans for that matter?
I think I agree that they do put people first in their engagement, because I think these terms, colonize, neocolonialism, China will do this and that. I really understand it because we've been traumatized over years by slavery, colonialism as African peoples.
That's right.
So that sentiment lies deep within us, the fear of the stranger, the fear of the foreigner. It's a common sentiment that I do understand and appreciate. However, sometimes it gets in our way of building strong relationships with our willing partners and honest partners. When it comes to China, let's look at it this way. Is it people-centered? It's a development goals. We have the right to development. Yeah. China has championed this within the United Nations, the right to development. And I believe, to me, that is one of the most fundamental rights, because the right to development ensures the right to a dignified life. Yeah. And China invests in our hospitals, in our education, in our infrastructure, things that make our lives easier. You have good education, you have human rights. You have good health care, you have human rights. You have good roads, good infrastructure, our highways. You have good human rights. That means you are enjoying your life. At the end of the day, what is freedom if you're not enjoying your life, if you're sad? So China approaches us through that by focusing on our needs and our wants, and we are the ones who dictate what our needs and our wants are. We are not some kind of child that we have to be told this is what you want, this is what you need. We decide, and our cooperation on China should be fundamentally based on that aspect of cooperation, whereby we determine what we need and China caters to our needs with its national interests in mind and our national interests in mind.
Okay. Dr. Alawi, when the summits are done and the fanfare has died down, Uganda will effectively begin the role of steering work and progress for the next 3 years, as we shall be the chair of NAM and shall be the chair of the G77 plus China. Now, the NAM itself is an opportunity to engage further, especially in terms of trade. But if you are to leverage on the enormous advantages that come with these two positions, what should we be selling and what should we be asking China of? You know? Well, especially with regard to our comparative advantages, it could be within the trade aspects or even our strategic, you know, foreign policy issues that we need to attend to.
Thank you very much, because it's very important. I wish, if you can allow me just to briefly talk about
very quickly.
When it comes to issues to do with colonialism, we know who has colonized the world. We know who continues with neocolonialism. I don't know anywhere where any country on earth which China has colonized. It has never colonized, but it was colonized. China was colonized, Britain was in, Japan was in, and they really humiliated them. And this actually, when you listen to Chinese scholars, Chinese diplomats, they tell you this is why they feel no any other country should be colonized, because they were humiliated when they did the Nanjing Agreement, when they took Hong Kong from them, when they took Taiwan from them and ceded it to Japan and later gave it back. So we know who are colonizers, but again, let's not forget that someone sitting in Washington penning down, sanctioning Higenyi in Kampala, tell me any other way, any other form of neocolonialism or colonialism directly other than that. So you know who to fear, my dear listeners. Then when we move away from that, when it goes to infrastructure, the African Development Bank and the World Bank, they tell us that Africa needs between 130 to 170 billion annually if we are to develop our infrastructure, which is aging. What would that translate to? 1.3% up to 2% of economic growth and socio-economic growth. Where do we get this money? World Bank, IMF, the traditional borrowers, they are now telling us if you are to get money, you must put it in public sector, in public service. They are telling us if you want this money, maybe you should accept a mosh to introduce Alawi or Higenyi, and which some Ugandans are saying, we don't want that. What is China telling us? We will give you this money, you will do infrastructure development, it's up to you how to live. So what should Ugandans do? What should Africans do? When President Higenyi gets the money from China, we should tell President Higenyi that we want this money to do this and this and this, we Ugandans. But we should not expect even China to tell us. After all, it's a loan, it's a grant. And by the way, they play by that. What should we expect from China, or what should we tell them to do, as you've said? One, we know there is Forum on China-Africa, FOCAC. Recently they met in Dakar, Senegal, and they came up with Dakar Declaration. It points at 9 points. One key of them is trade, and if you've seen Uganda, what we've been importing from China, largely it was electronics, it was things from industries. But as we are talking, it is reducing. Why? Because we have industries in Kapeka, we have some industrial parks.
That's right.
Who are the people that are behind them? Of course, these are Chinese. That's one. But we need this to spread, because it's not really enough. We need more of this. But we also must be mindful to understand that our country, for example, we are about 45 million. million, maybe they think that we cannot get more. But I think we are on the right track. Number two, China should also promote green development or green economy, which they agreed upon in the Dhaka Declaration, because we know that climate change is real, but the good thing, they are trying to do that. When it comes to health, there is that health cooperation, there is promoting people-to-people exchange so that people can go and learn from each other. There is also supporting trade. By the way, in December last year, China announced zero tariff on over 90% products from Uganda. What does that mean? That if we have coffee that is of good quality, we can take it to Chinese market. We will not have to pay taxes.
That's right.
What does that mean? That we can export more, and we can earn that foreign money which we need, the dollar. By the way, I am one of the people who think that we need to de-dollarize the world, the economy. Then what else should we do? There is also security cooperation. We need to learn from them. They need also to support us. And there is also, for example, infrastructure support. So there are very many things which we can ask Chinese counterparts to help us go. But I also believe there are other members in the G77. There is India. Yes. So these are countries we must all work with. We can't really say we are going to put
only at China.
Only at one. But we know that at least from what we've seen, that these are allies. On debt trap, I can conclude with this. The UK, took them 60 years to pay the debt of Canada and Japan shortly after World War. It took them 60 years. But for us, and you know, there is a Danish scholar, he said that infrastructure is a great shrinker, that those who want development, those who want dignity, should reduce infrastructure space. And how do you reduce infrastructure space? Yesterday, I traveled from here in Kampala to the airport. It took me about 30 minutes. I went in a private vehicle. As I was coming back, because I laid there, I came with a public means from, I think, Carrefour supermarket. By the time we reached at the public service here, I paid 5,000, and it took us less than 20 minutes. I called him to meet him, and I said, oh my God, before it was 2 hours plus.
2 hours plus, yeah.
Because of expressway. So I think we have many things which we can point at as a result of what China has done. But I still strongly believe we have a long way to go. What we need to tell them is that they should remain mutual friends. They should remain the friends that support win-win cooperation. Where you win, I also win. They should be friends who will not tell us what to do. They should be friends that really, who are sincere, other than undermining our institutions. And by the way, if you Higenyi, if you undermined, or any other person, if you undermined the institutions of the US, they have the so-called long-arm jurisdiction. Whether you are in Karamoja, whether you hide in Kabera Maido, they will go after you. So we should tell Chinese never to learn such behaviors. I think, and I don't think they are about to do that.
Okay. Mr. Moshi, I believe you do agree entirely with Dr. Alawi's submission on that. But I also want you to help us understand where we are in terms of academic collaboration with China. We've seen many students who've been in China, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, who needed to be repatriated back. It was a large number, and that speaks to ongoing collaboration on the academic front. Are we optimistic that in 10 years' time, the kind of infrastructure projects in engineering and architecture that we see in China will be solely undertaken here in Uganda by Ugandan engineers and architects?
Okay, that's a very good one. And and I would say this entirely depends on us and our government planning. If we go into negotiations as the inferior side, as the weak opponent on the other side of the negotiating table, we will be taken for a ride.
That's right.
But if we go in wide-eyed and with very foreknowledge of what we need, I think all this collaboration could be beneficial, because at least we have an advantage that China seeks win-win cooperations. And here's the thing. Uganda's government or African governments need to plan for their countries and need to put their needs at the forefront.
That's right.
And China is here to help us do this because it is seeking such partnerships that are beneficial, mutually beneficial. And our academic collaboration has been increasing, as per se. Even China is going up in its research publications and stuff, and its universities are being ranked globally these days, are competing with the West properly. And our collaboration with China in the academic sphere is increasing because we see many of our own students going to China and engaging in such a collaboration. And I will conclude by saying that our countries, African countries, do not seek to decouple or de-risk from the West. We seek a fair engagement with them, as we have with China.
All right. Yeah. Okay, 1 minute. Dr. Allow we close this so that we go to Stephen Mbide, who will be telling us about the losers, especially when it comes to what the preparations are with regard to the summits.
Thank you very much. One thing that I need to talk about, you see, through people-to-people connection, we've had, I think there is about 5,000 Ugandans that have so far benefited from the short and long-term courses from China. But our challenge as Africa is one that, as of now, for example, a country like Uganda, we don't have a policy on how to work with China. Kenya, they don't have. In East Africa, there is no any country. In Africa, it is only South Africa. So, and this forms one of the reasons why a think tank like us, the Uganda Research Center, we came up. We think that there should be, we should come up with a policy on how, we know they are friends, but we need to know what to ask them, when and why. And if you might know, I don't know if you are informed of this, the most scholar on China Africa is American, Deborah, and the highly ranked institute that studies China Africa cooperation is at Johns Hopkins University. So we need one maybe in Kampala. It would be okay in Kenya. It would be okay in any, or China. So this is where we are. But I think that China is also fronting this, and also our scholars, so African scholars and Ugandan scholars, to be precise.
All right, Dr. Halawi Semanda, Executive Director of the Sino-Uganda Research Center, many thanks for joining us, and many thanks to you too. Moshi Israel, a researcher at the Sino-Uganda Research Center, for the perspective on everything China and what Uganda stands to benefit as we prepare to host the G77 plus China Summit. Now, Stephen Mbide is standing by, and of course preparations are underway, and the Munyonyo Gaba area is one that will see the fanfare and the splendor as the guests will be driving in sirens and escorts. I do not know how the people or the residents there will find this whole scenario,